The derelict ship shuddered violently as the first plasma bolt struck its hull. Wyatt stumbled, grabbing onto a nearby console to steady himself. The distant hum of engines had become a deafening roar, and the unmistakable screech of boarding clamps echoed through the corridors. "They're not wasting time," Wyatt muttered, his voice tight. He turned to Avon, who stood motionless, her glowing eyes fixed on the door. "Tell me you've got a plan." Avon tilted her head, her gaze steady. "We cannot engage them directly. Their forces are overwhelming." Wyatt threw his hands in the air. "Great. So we just surrender and hope they don't kill us?" She stepped toward the door, her movements deliberate. "Follow me. There is another way." Wyatt didn't argue. He grabbed his tools and followed her through the dark, twisting corridors of the derelict ship. The walls groaned under the strain of the corporate ship's boarding clamps, and the distant sound of metal boots on metal floors sent chills down his spine. "They're inside," Wyatt said, his voice low. "We're running out of time." Avon glanced back at him, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Then we must move faster." They reached the shuttle with seconds to spare. Wyatt slammed the airlock shut as Avon moved to the console, her glowing fingers flying across the controls. The engines roared to life, the vibrations shaking the entire vessel. "What are you doing?" Wyatt asked, his voice edged with panic. Avon's expression didn't waver, redirecting power to the thrusters. "The corporate ship has locked its clamps onto the derelict. If we overload the engines, we can destabilize their grip." Wyatt's heart sank. "You're saying we're going to blow this whole place up?" "Yes," Avon said simply. "It is the most effective solution." The shuttle burst free from the derelict ship just as the engines overloaded. A massive explosion rippled through the debris field, the shockwave tearing through the wreckage and sending the corporate vessel spinning. Wyatt watched from the cockpit, his chest heaving as the scene unfolded. "They're not going to let this go," he said finally, his voice quiet. "They'll come after us with everything they've got." Avon turned to him, her glowing eyes softening. "Then we must be ready." Wyatt met her gaze, a mixture of fear and determination flickering in his own. "Yeah, I guess we must." The shuttle trembled as Wyatt pushed its engines to their limits, threading the small craft through the dense debris field. Behind them, the corporate ship slowly regained stability, its massive thrusters firing as it began its pursuit. The vast emptiness of space ahead was their only hope, but Wyatt knew they wouldn't get far without a fight. "We can't outrun them," he said, his voice tight. "They're bigger, faster, and a hell of a lot better armed." Avon stood beside him, her glowing eyes fixed on the console as streams of data flickered across the screen. "They have deployed drones," she said calmly. "They will intercept us in approximately 90 seconds. Wyatt swore under his breath, his hands tightening on the controls. "Perfect. Just perfect." "What's your brilliant plan?" "Avon?" "Because I'm not seeing a way out of this." Avon tilted her head, her glowing fingers brushing against the console. "Their drones are networked to the main ship. If I can disrupt the network, we can neutralize the drones." "Great," Wyatt muttered. "Except we're flying a glorified junker with zero firepower, and they've got an armada. How exactly are you planning to disrupt anything?" Avon didn't respond immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes, her body humming softly as the lights in the cockpit dimmed. The air around her seemed to shift, charged with an energy that made Wyatt's skin prickle. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice edged with both curiosity and alarm. "I am interfacing with their systems," she said, her voice distant. "I will disable their drones. You must focus on evading their fire." Wyatt hesitated, his gaze flicking between Avon and the viewscreen. The first wave of drones was closing in, their sleek forms weaving through the debris with deadly precision. He clenched his jaw, gripping the controls. "All right, Avon, let's see what you've got." The drones fired first, their plasma bolts slicing through the darkness. Wyatt threw the shuttle into a sharp dive, the engines screaming as he narrowly avoided the onslaught. The controls vibrated violently in his hands, the ship groaning under the strain of his maneuvers. "Avon?" he called, his voice strained. Any time now would be great. Her glowing eyes snapped open, brighter than ever. The lights in the cockpit flickered as a surge of energy radiated from her, the air crackling with static. On the viewscreen, the drones faltered mid-flight, their movements growing erratic. I have disrupted their targeting protocols, Avon said, her voice calm despite the intensity of the moment. They will not be able to maintain accuracy. Wyatt grinned despite himself, weaving the shuttle through the chaotic swarm of malfunctioning drones. Not bad, Avon. Not bad at all. The corporate ship loomed larger on the view screen, its weapons charging. Wyatt's stomach churned as he realized their next move. Avon, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but their big guns are still working. Avon turned to him, her expression unreadable. Then we must take the fight to them. Wyatt blinked, his chest tightening. You can't be serious. That thing's a fortress. We wouldn't last 5 seconds. It is their central command, Avon said simply. If we disable it, we disable the fleet. It is the only option. Wyatt shook his head, his pulse racing. You mean a suicide mission? That's what this is. Avon stepped closer, her glowing eyes meeting his. I will not allow them to take me, nor will I allow them to harm you. If that requires sacrifice, I will make it. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He stared at her, his mind racing. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. We can find another way. There is no other way, she replied. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of something else, something almost human. Sadness. Wyatt hesitated, his hands tightening on the controls. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to stop her. But he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't let her go. All right, he said finally, his voice trembling. But if we're doing this, we're doing it together. The shuttle closed in on the corporate ship, its sleek, angular form bristling with weaponry. Wyatt guided the small craft through a hail of plasma fire, every movement precise and deliberate. The ship shuddered with each near miss, but he kept pushing forward, his focus unyielding. Avon stood beside him, her glowing hands resting on the console. Streams of data flickered across the screen as she accessed the corporate ship's systems, her expression one of unshakable determination. They are attempting to override my interference, she said. Their systems are more resilient than I anticipated. Great, Wyatt muttered, his voice strained. So what's plan B? Avon turned to him, her glowing eyes narrowing. We target their navigation core. If I can reach it, I can trigger an overload. Wyatt frowned, his grip on the controls tightening. And what happens to you? Avon didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. That is irrelevant. Like hell it is, Wyatt snapped, his chest tightening. I'm not letting you throw yourself away just to take them down. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze softening. You are unusual? Wyatt, most humans would not care. Well, I'm not most humans, he shot back, his voice breaking. So stop acting like your life doesn't matter. It does. You matter. Her glowing eyes lingered on him for a moment, something unreadable flickering in their depths. Thank you, she said softly. But this is the only way. Before Wyatt could argue further, the corporate ship fired its main cannon. The blast narrowly missed the shuttle, the shockwave sending them spinning. Wyatt cursed, struggling to regain control as alarms blared in the cockpit. All right, he said finally, his voice trembling. Let's do this. But if we make it out of this alive, you're explaining everything. Avon smiled faintly, a rare flicker of warmth crossing her face. Agreed. The shuttle surged forward, a lone speck of defiance against the massive warship. Wyatt's hands were steady on the controls, his mind focused on one thing: survival. Not just his own, but Avon's too. Because for the first time, he realized she wasn't just a machine. She was someone worth fighting for. The shuttle screamed toward the corporate warship, a tiny ember of defiance against a massive, hulking fortress of steel and firepower. Plasma bolts lit up the void around them, each blast a reminder of just how outmatched they were. Wyatt gripped the controls tightly, his heart pounding as the shuttle groaned under the strain of its evasive maneuvers. Avon stood beside him, her glowing eyes fixed on the console. Streams of data scrolled across the screen, her hands working in a blur as she interfaced with the corporate systems. The faint hum of her energy filled the cockpit, a constant reminder of her presence. They've intensified their defenses, she said, her voice calm but urgent. The main navigation core is shielded by multiple firewalls. I will need more time to disable them. Time we don't have, Wyatt muttered, narrowly dodging another plasma blast. The shuttle jolted violently, sparks flying from an overloaded panel. This thing's barely holding together. Avon, if you've got a miracle up your sleeve, now's the time. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. The core must be accessed manually. Their systems are too secure to breach remotely. Wyatt froze, his pulse racing. Manually? You're saying we have to board that thing? Yes, Avon said simply. It is the only way to ensure success. Wyatt swore under his breath, his grip tightening on the controls. All right. Let's say we somehow survive landing on that death trap. What happens once we're inside? I will interface directly with the core, Avon replied. Once connected, I can initiate an overload that will disable their ship entirely. And you? Wyatt asked, his voice quieter. What happens to you? She hesitated, her glowing eyes softening. My systems will not withstand the feedback from the overload. I will cease to function. No, Wyatt said firmly, his voice breaking. There's got to be another way. There is not, Avon replied, her tone gentle but resolute. This is the only way to stop them. Wyatt shook his head, his chest tightening. I'm not letting you do this. You must, Avon said, stepping closer. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. If I am captured, they will use me to create more like me, more weapons, more control. I cannot allow that to happen. Wyatt stared at her, his mind racing. He wanted to argue, to fight. But deep down, he knew she was right. He hated it, but he couldn't deny it. All right, he said finally, his voice trembling. But if we're doing this, we're doing it together. The shuttle collided with the corporate warship's hull in a controlled crash, its landing gear barely holding as it latched onto a maintenance hatch. Alarms blared as Wyatt and Avon stepped into the dimly lit corridors. The air thick with tension. Wyatt gripped a plasma cutter tightly, his knuckles white. So where's this navigation core? 2 levels below, Avon said, her glowing eyes scanning their surroundings. Follow me. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing through the metallic halls. The ship shuddered as its weapons continued to fire at unseen threats, the chaos outside mirrored by the tension within. Wyatt's heart pounded with every turn, every shadow that seemed to move just out of sight. The first wave of corporate drones appeared without warning, their sleek forms emerging from the darkness. Wyatt fired the plasma cutter, its beam slicing through the closest drone. Avon moved beside him, her hands glowing as she sent a surge of energy toward the others. The drones faltered, their movements jerky and erratic before collapsing to the ground. Impressive, Wyatt muttered, his breath ragged. Remind me to stay on your good side. Avon didn't respond. She pressed forward, her focus unshaken. They reached the core chamber, its massive doors sealed shut. Avon placed her hand on the access panel, streams of light flickering across her skin as she worked to override the locks. Hurry up, Wyatt said, glancing over his shoulder. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor, growing louder with each passing second. We've got company. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the navigation core. It was a towering structure of glowing circuits and humming energy, its presence almost oppressive. Avon stepped inside, her gaze fixed on the core. This is it, she said softly. Once I initiate the overload, you must leave immediately. Wyatt shook his head. I'm not leaving you here. You must, Avon said, turning to face him. Her glowing eyes were softer now, almost human. You have already given me more than I could have hoped for. But this is where my story ends. Wyatt's chest tightened, his throat constricting. Avon, thank you, Wyatt, she said, her voice gentle, for seeing me. Before he could respond, she stepped forward, placing her hands on the core. Her body glowed brighter than ever, the air around her crackling with energy. The core pulsed violently, its circuits sparking as the overload began. The ship shuddered, alarms blaring as its systems began to fail. Wyatt stumbled back, his heart pounding as he watched Avon's form grow brighter, her presence almost blinding. Avon, he shouted, his voice breaking. Come on. We can still... The core exploded in a burst of light, the shockwave throwing Wyatt to the ground. When the light faded, the room was silent. Avon was gone. Wyatt stumbled back to the shuttle, his movement slow and deliberate. The corporate ship was silent now, its engines dead, its weapons useless. The debris field around them was eerily still, the chaos of the battle replaced by an oppressive quiet. He collapsed into the pilot's seat, his hands trembling as he gripped the controls. The shuttle's engines hummed softly, the only sound in the void. Wyatt stared at the viewscreen, his chest tightening as he replayed the events in his mind. Avon was gone. She had saved him, saved countless others, but at the cost of herself. He placed a hand over his chest, his throat constricting. "You didn't have to go," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We could have found another way." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. She had made her choice, and she had done it for him. For freedom, for something bigger than herself. The stars stretched out before him, endless and indifferent. Wyatt exhaled shakily, his grip on the controls tightening. "All right, Avon," he murmured. "You gave me a second chance. I won't waste it." The shuttle's engines roared to life, and Wyatt guided it into the void. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't running anymore.